Hello, Professor and fellow classmates. I read through the North Carolina um, statute, laws and statute, and disciplinary for the counselors. I'm going to do this by question and answer. What are the most common reasons for the board to discipline a counselor? I found a lot of the common reasons were documentation and records. And it was a few romantic relationships, but not as many as documentation and records. What is your personal reaction as you read through the list? My personal reaction was that I was a little shocked at it being more record and documentation than romantic relationships. I thought the most common thing was romantic relationships, but I kind of counted and it was more um, documentation and records and fraudulent cases than it was romantic relationships. According to Remley and Hurley, counselors keep clinical case notes for their own benefit, and if counselors are accused of not having provided competent services, the records serve as evidence of their thinking, and the notes document any actions taken. So that is one of the reasons why I really was surprised that it was a lot of cases on documentation and fraudulent and not documenting services rendered, things of that nature. I always thought that the counselor field was pretty tight knit with um, documentation. Um, I was especially shocked when reading a particular case which the counselor was convicted of federal wire fraud and aiding and abetting a federal arson. Now that was really a shock. I didn't expect. I think my expectations were that because of what I'm being taught and because of me being in the field as long as I have, and I've always been taught if you don't write it down, it hasn't happened. Document, and so I thought that that was all across the board, everywhere, and I'm learning that that's not so much the case. What are some of the themes you see when you look at the common reasons for the board discipline? The themes I seen was cases of fraudulent billing, no documentation for services rendered. Um, I seen some romantic relationships, and with the romantic relationships, there was a theme where it was about three of them that they started out the counselor was counseling the whole family, and then eventually it went down to uh the just the husband and the wife, and then it went to just the husband, and then that's when the romantic relationship began, or either it began during that time of the counseling with the family. Choose one of the more recent cases and discuss the following. The most um, the most recent case was just a couple of months ago, and it was investigated, and the charge letter was written on my birthday, March 3rd, 2023. The following question is the following question is what was the behavior that led to the discipline? In my opinion, the behavior was carelessness, irresponsibility, and negligence. The counselor provided telehealth services to a client in another state without notifying the board in that state for permission to render services. Also, the counselor sent out paperwork and such as consent to treatment, the professional disclosure statement, and the scheduling policy, among other documents. The client signed the forms and returned them. During the investigation, the counsel was unable to provide the clinical documentation of the records or of the intake session. In addition, the board stated that the counselor displayed unprofessional behavior by utilizing a walking desk throughout the duration of the intake session. And then after the intake session, the client contacted the counselor by email and text, which was the way that it was put in the paperwork, the procedure in the paperwork. And the counselor never responded, which left the client in emotional distress. So that was the case, that the most recent case. Identify and share the ACA codes and state codes that was violated. The ACA Code of Ethics the council violated were it was a lot of code of ethics that this council violated. So I'm going to read off the list. Section A1A, which is about primary responsibility. The primary responsibility of counselors is to respect the dignity and promote the welfare of the clients. Section A1B, A1C, that is about records and documentation, by the counselor creating, safeguarding, and maintaining documentation. A1C, which is about counseling plans. Counselors and their clients work jointly in devising counseling plans. A4A, which is avoiding harm. Counselors act to avoid harming their clients. Trainings, research participants, and to minimize or to remedy unavoidable or an unanticipated harm. And then it goes into the B's. So it was B6A, B6H, which is about creating and maintaining records and documentation. Again, storage and disposal after termination, how the counselor should store the records following termination of services. So after a certain amount of time, the counselor should hold on to those records for a certain amount of time. I think it's like 7 years before discarding them after seeing a client, or either after terminating clients services. And then we had H1B and H5A, which is about law and statute counselors who engage in the use of distance counseling, that they must get the permission and in order to practice law in another state. And H5A, which is about records, once again, maintaining electronic records and informing the client of maintaining those records. So the council also violated the state codes. The council violated was the North Carolina General Statute 9340A7, A9, and A10, which consists of the board. 9340A states the board may, in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 15B of the General Statutes, deny, suspend, or revoke licensee, discipline, place on probation, limit practice, or require examination, remediation, or rehabilitation of any person's license under this article, one or more of the following grounds. And the grounds were that the client had violated any provision of the article or any rules, or if they have been guilty of immoral, dishonorable, or unprofessional or unethical conduct, or has practiced clinical mental health counseling in such a manner as to endanger the welfare of the client. And so that was all that the counselor violated. What was the outcome of the board discipline? The outcome in this case is pending and under investigation. But if it's proven, it could provide sanctions for the counselor's license to be taken. What does the code of ACA ethics and state code say about counselor impairment? F5B in the ACA code, section F5B states impairment states students and supervisees monitor themselves for signs of impairment from their own physical, mental, or emotional problems and refrain from offering or providing professional services when such impairment, and if necessary, they limit, suspend, or terminate their professional responsibilities until it is determined that they may safely resume their work. What is a question this brings to mind? The question this brings to mind, all of this brings to mind the question of what is counseling coming to? It's almost scary to me to think it's to see as many cases as I seen that were fraudulent or because of no documentation at all. It's almost as if the counselors do not care about services anymore and making sure that substance abuse or mental health services can continue on, because if we're not keeping up our part of our end of the bargain, then what is that to say, to the federal or to the government that they're going to pay for these services and things of that nature if we're not going to abide and stay within the guidelines? I don't know. This brings about the question, what is counseling coming to me in 2023? For me, starting in the field in 2007 to 2023, it's been a really, really big change. I always thought that no matter what, documentation was not going to be an issue when it came to counseling. But today I see that it is. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.